I am Kelly Fordon, and I'm thrilled to be here for the third season of Let's Deconstruct a Story. I'm also a bit giddy because the podcast is now being produced in collaboration with the Grosse Pointe Public Library in Michigan. The GPPL has committed to purchasing 10 books by each of these authors to give to their patrons. If you are a short story writer who has tried to make money in this game, then you know what a big deal that is. My hope is that other libraries will follow the GPPL's lead and be inspired to buy books by these talented short story writers. I'll be contacting many libraries this year to suggest it. Please feel free to do the same if you feel so inclined. Libraries need good books, and good books are written by writers who devote themselves to craft. A win-win in my estimation. Kelly Fordon, and I'm here today with Lily King, and we are talking about her title story from her collection, 5 Tuesdays in Winter. Welcome, Lily.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to talk about this story. I loved it, and I have so many questions, so I'll get right to it.
Okay, great.
So I guess I'll start with the big overarching question, which is, can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of this story? I know it's an older story. I noticed that it was published in Plowshares in like 2005, I think.
Yeah, okay, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is an older story. And those stories that I wrote in the very, very late, like 1999 to 2006 are all a little bit of a blur because I was having children at that time. And so kind of whatever would come out of me came out of me. And it wasn't very well planned. And I was always just stealing time to kind of get things down. And so there are other stories that I could tell you exactly where I was and what I was thinking and how the idea hit me and what I thought next. And this one, I don't have a moment where it came to me, and I can't really say. I know that that I was playing around with my own experiences, having worked in bookstores before, and it's often happened to me that I would have a crush on my boss, of the bookstore. Because they're so literary and passionate about books, and I feel like those crushes were often unrequited and very silent on my part. I wasn't one to kind of push my crush on anybody, and I feel like I decided to just take another perspective and sort of write, the story. What if one of them had a crush on me?
Right. And I didn't even know. Yeah,
exactly. So I just kind of played around with that idea. Kate is definitely not me in a lot of ways, but just that scenario, of being in a bookstore is familiar to me.
Yeah, I was going to ask this later, but I'll ask about the bookstore in particular right now, because I was thinking, I haven't been to Portland, Maine, and I don't know what the city's like. And I was thinking, how would a bookstore do? How is he surviving? Is it a thriving literary community, or is it can you describe the town a little bit? And were you thinking of a specific bookstore?
Yeah, it's funny. I set this, I believe, initially in Connecticut, and then I at some point I changed it to Maine, maybe because we'd moved here, but also they were putting together an anthology of Maine writers, and I kind of maybe remember that being part of the reason I changed it from Connecticut to Portland, Maine. And I didn't even live in Portland, Maine at the time. I was living in Yarmouth. And yeah, I picture it. So his is a used bookstore. And of course, this is set back in the 90s. And when used bookstores actually were much more thriving. And I feel like we've lost, since I started working in bookstores in the late 80s, we really lost a lot of used bookstores along the way. And but he's doing okay. I mean, it's definitely a labor of love. He's not getting wealthy on these recent books, but he's surviving.
Yeah, and he has an employee, so that was impressive too. It makes me sad how hard it is to survive for bookstores now.
I know.
But so it's hard to imagine the story written from another perspective because Mitchell is so reticent, but and through the use of the close third POV, we really get access to his mind. But I was just wondering if he was always in your mind. Do you remember the main character? You always wanted to tell it from his perspective. And did you ever play around with, giving us Kate's or his daughters or anybody?
Yeah. No, it was always Mitchell, always. I mean, I get a lot of clues, when I write that first paragraph. And if it's working, if I feel it, I feel that voice, then I just keep going with it. And I definitely felt him right away. A lot like I felt my character Bankson in Euphoria, just the minute I hit him, I had that story. And before that, I didn't have it. And I felt the same way about this character. He just was there, kind of fully formed. I just knew him.
Wow. And I love the use of the word reticent. And I was wondering if that was like the first word that came to mind when you were thinking of Mitchell and what you meant by reticent in particular.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely a man who is just, has been damaged in various ways and really has learned to keep everything inside, and he's so much more than reticent. And yet, his daughter, that's the way she can describe him. But he's really, he's almost kind of dangerously locked in, and he somehow has to find someone he can trust to let himself out,
Yeah, and his wife says that about him too, doesn't she? Yeah, so locked in. I love that we learn so much about him through the way he sees other people. When he says he wishes he had a bouncer at the store to remove ignorant people, we learn he's quite intolerant and easily irritated. And then he says his daughter's too tall and too sophisticated for a Maine preteen, and she makes him uneasy. And so from that, I kind of learned that even things that are objectively good make him fearful. And then he hears Lincoln on the answering machine sounding high-strung and full of anticipation, as if he only ever expected good news after the beat. And then we learn that it's not something that Mitchell expects in his own life. So I just was interested in that because most writers, when they're describing characters, they're describing their actions, they're describing their gestures. We tend to, as writers, concentrate on those tangible things. And I thought this is so interesting, having access to his thoughts and what he's thinking of others and learning as much about his psyche that way. Mm-hmm. Is that something that comes to you naturally, or did it at some point occur to you? I don't know. Because you're so good at it, just showing us what a character is thinking, and it just reveals so much about them.
Well, I just think that's the nature of it. I just think if you tap into someone and you kind of, hear their thoughts, you absolutely are going to reveal things. And you don't even necessarily know at the time what you are revealing or why they're thinking that, or I can't say it's an intellectual process at all. It's really, it's much more intuitive.
Mm-hmm. It feels that way when you read it. Yeah, it feels like it's all intuitive. But I do think that maybe young writers don't realize that if you just follow the thoughts of your character, it's going to reveal so much more than if, the guy who's always got a tick or, something.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. And if you're thinking, oh, well, I'll have to have him think this because it will reveal that, it's going to feel forced, the reader in some way is going to feel like it's false. I'm not sure that it's the best way to go about it. To think sort of kind of scientifically about what you're trying to do. I think the whole trick to writing is really letting go. And for example, my kids, when they were younger, they had this really phenomenal art teacher, and she really felt that children make the best art, and then they get instruction and it's ruined, and then they have to unlearn everything to get back to that original kind of a font of, just pure creativity, pure letting go without any, of the more cerebral stuff coming in and telling you what's good and what's bad and what you should be doing and that sort of thing. And I really feel that way about writing, that if you can just really tap into something sort of in the deepest part of you, without all of that control and criticism and sort of, intellectual patterns. I think that's where you get the good stuff.
And so would you, in a story like this, you would write even more? You might have to cut then, right? Like, so you let yourself go and then you might get too much material and you cut it back afterwards. Would that be?
Yeah, I think that does happen to some people. I'm more of, I err on the side of saying too little often. And so I think that my one paragraph has covered it. But then I have to go back and clarify and add some more and that sort of thing. So I often have to add rather than subtract.
Okay.
But I do think, best to let go and write more and cut back.
Right. So he has all these conversations in his head that never take place in the real world. And one is about Kate's faded, untucked shirts and the joke he was maybe going to tell about how she didn't have to wear used clothes because she worked in a used bookstore. And then he imagines her response. So there's this whole drawn out situation that's happening in his head and he never allows to come to the surface. So what do you think it is about Kate in particular that allows him that freedom of speech? Because I was thinking there's that moment that they're in the bookstore together, and they would have that purely professional situation where they'd just be doing their work and they wouldn't talk at all. And she doesn't push it.
Yeah.
So it's not that she's pushing it. There's something about her. I don't know. Is it just a matter of time that allows him to trust her?
Yeah, I do think that there's a certain tolerance for him that he senses, and we have no idea what's going on in her mind, Mm-hmm. I mean, my guess is she's falling really hard for him, and he doesn't see it that way at all. And so, the tolerance that he feels is, kind of probably what he thinks is the best he can get,
Right.
But he responds to that. He senses that there's room for him, in some way in her behaviors that it certainly is not spoken. And he's just slowly feeling it. I mean, I think that moment with the mushroom soup, is a moment when he realizes she's listening to me. Like, she cares about, the little things, the one little thing that brought me joy, 4 years ago. And she's just meticulously every day kind of, waiting to find that for him. And I think that there are little things, little signs along the way, slowly that help him kind of relax a little bit and trust a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So early on, you described very succinctly how much he's lost, but you do it in such a way that his trauma doesn't overwhelm the story. I'm not sure how you manage it because he's lost so much. Like first we learn that his buddy Brad came, and I should interrupt and say everybody will have read the story beforehand. Hopefully I'm going to reveal it all. But his buddy Brad came to visit from Australia and left 2 weeks later with the lobster and his wife. And then in the next paragraph, and it's just one small paragraph, you say that he hadn't been devastated because it had been happening all his life. His mother had died, his father had died, and then his friend Aaron had died. But I wondered, that must have been difficult because so easily that trauma could have taken over the whole story. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, when I read it the first time as just like a reader and I wasn't digging deeply into it, it didn't overwhelm it. And I wondered, did you work at that? Or, I mean, we need to know, we have to have that information so we have empathy for him. But
yeah, I very rarely approach trauma, or that, those kinds of losses or anything like that head on. Mm-hmm. And I do feel like, everyone carries, I mean, he's whatever in his early 40s, everyone's carrying around their sack of rocks by that age. Everyone's got things mostly that
right.
that they've suffered through, and I find that just kind of raw suffering is not what I'm interested in writing about. I am very interested in writing about people who have suffered mm-hmm. and what their world looked like afterward. And but I think that there's too much of an equation with, you introduce the trauma and then you introduce the behavior afterwards, and then you have your little tidy sum for the story. And I'm not really interested in that, that equation.
Yeah. Because people in real life are so much more complicated than
exactly.
Yeah. You recover for a little bit, then you fall back and you go through it again.
And everybody has such an individual response to their own suffering and mm-hmm. their own things in life that have gone badly, and that's what I find really interesting is that, how one person can respond one way and another person can respond entirely differently.
Yeah, it's so true. So for a long time, I wondered why the date, he takes the woman on the date and they go to the movie and she talks through, it's a comedy and she talks through the whole thing. And I wondered why did that, that's really annoying. I get it, but it bothered him. He said, more than he thought it should have. And I was curious. I have a theory, but since I have you, I would love to know what you were thinking about exactly why that.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm very curious about your theory. I guess I was just thinking that, she was a real talker and,
yeah,
over here talking about the date.
That is just on it. That's very annoying.
Yeah. And it's for him. It's just, she's just absolutely not right for him. And it's funny, she's like Lincoln, she's very upbeat. She has a lot of energy, and it, for whatever reason, just rubs him the wrong way. He's not ready for that energy. It doesn't feel real to him. Mm-hmm. And feels a little forced. But anyway, what's your theory?
Well, so it took me a little while to figure. I came up with this theory that, he's so quiet and so reserved that I'm not sure this is right at all. But there is, when I went through a Google search of how many times laughter or comedy or that, you mentioned those words. So it seemed like laughter drew him to, well, here's what I have written here. Let me see. It took me a while to figure out that laughter draws him to Kate, and missing out on the comedy is what irritates him so much. On the date, everyone in the audience laughing except them. Aaron has a hyena laugh, a laugh that nearly broke Mitchell's eardrums. He and Mrs. White share a laugh over Thomas Pynchon's picture. And then there was another scene too. So Mrs. White has a scene with laughter. Kate's always laughing with Paula.
Right.
And he's always kind of on the outside of it. So it's not like he seems like he's a humorous character or anything. And yet every single time there was someone who mattered to him, you mentioned that there was laughter involved.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah.
Isn't that why? And then
I thought about that.
I mean, those are the things I love about short stories or writing in general, where maybe it was subconscious. Because Mrs. White even says at ease. And I thought, oh, well, that's, he wants to be relaxed. He wants to enjoy it. But
yeah. I like that.
So
very interesting.
Yeah. And then, okay, so there is another question I had, and I have no theory on this one. So he watches Kate when she goes out to her car and she brushes off the windows, or he wonders, is she going to brush off all the windows or just the front and the back? But she doesn't do any of them. And I was just wondering, why did he care? What was he looking for in that moment, do you think?
I think he's so, I don't know. For me, that moment is really about, being so infatuated with someone or so taken with someone that you want to know every single little thing they do,
Yeah.
How is she going to brush off her car?
Right. You notice everything about them, like the snow melting on her coat and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's just watching. Well, he seems like very fastidious himself too.
Exactly.
So yeah.
And I think he needs someone like Kate in his life.
Yeah. So how would you describe her if you had to describe her? I'm curious, because we didn't get into her mind, and she is a bit of a mysterious character.
Well, I do think, when I think of her, I do think that she came to the city for Lincoln. It didn't work out. I feel like she's a little lost. She obviously had an adventure in Spain, and or was it Spain?
Yes, it was Spain. Yeah.
And I feel like she's someone who's really kind of looking for a home, and she lands on Mitchell and his daughter, and it fits. I feel like there's an incredible loneliness to her that we don't really get firsthand, but just when we watch her walking around the mall, I think that they're right on when they talk about how unhappy and lonely she looks, just kind of being stuck in Maine.
Yeah. And he's interesting too, because, he's always irritated by everything, and people, there's a scene, when they finally have the mushroom soup, which I thought was such a great moment. And then, as usual, the customers are coming in and they were irritating, and it was worse because it's winter and they always look like they're lost. And I thought, what an interesting profession for someone who actually doesn't want to interact with people that much. Like, why is he always exposing himself to this constant irritation?
Well, I mean, the thing is that that irritation is, I get the impression that not that love cures everything, but that, once he is able to really kind of let himself out and be with someone and have sort of an emotional kind of, give and take with somebody else, and like, I don't know, kind of have a healthier heart, and sort of thing. I feel like that irritation, will fade away, and at least to some degree, and that he will be more able to be around people, because people just remind him of what he doesn't have, kind of, he's been hurt by people, and, he trusts Paula, his daughter, but everybody else, just kind of grates on him.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I don't feel like that's permanent. I feel like that is a result of what's going on inside him. And I think he needs people, and I think he needs that job, and he needs to keep exposing himself to people. And so that one day, he might find somebody who could help unlock him,
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought that's so cool that it's almost like he still keeps the door open, literally in the bookstore for people to keep coming through,
right,
on the off chance that it will change and that something good will happen. And he starts to have that one conversation with Kate where he says, why did that drunk guy say we look alike, and blah, blah, blah. And then she says something, Pat, I can't remember exactly what she says.
Something about fear, I think.
Yeah. And he's like, oh no, this is going to be disappointing again. And then she says desire,
Right.
And that was pretty cool. I think once she lets down her guard, then he's able to do it as well.
Yeah. It's going to be a slow dance between them, no question.
Very slow, yeah. But beautiful. And then he has her doing the flyers in the back. I figured that was just to have her away from this guy so the guy wouldn't be able to find it. That was pretty straightforward.
Yes, okay. Yes. And that guy, and also the idea of any other guys, like, he hadn't really thought that somebody could come into the store and like ask her out. Like that was just horrific to her.
Right, like my store, he says. How could this happen here? The door is not open for you, whoever you are.
Exactly.
Okay, so a woman comes in looking for Middlemarch, and then Kate offers the alternate explanation. He's so irritated that this woman hasn't read Middlemarch yet. And Kate says, well, she could be reading it for the 137th time. She could be giving it to her granddaughter or her great-granddaughter. And he tried to think of what it was that really bothered him about the old woman. And then he realizes it's because he misses Mrs. White. And I also thought, there's sadness behind all irritation, isn't there? He's right. So irritated all the time, but it's not irritation. It's sadness.
Yeah.
At the bottom of it.
Sadness.
Yeah. And
it's sadness and it's longing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really
And again,
true.
I'm sure that was instinctual for you, but it's so amazing that it was just this one moment where he says that it's because he misses Mrs. White, but it's really, then it's revealed to the reader, this is his whole problem. This is he's sad about everything.
Right.
He's curmudgeonly because he's sad.
Right. Exactly. I'll just add to that. And I think I often forget, I think it's easy to forget that, like, you watch people's behavior, especially anger and hostility. And irritation, is just a mild version of anger. And I think it's, it's never like that. The end emotion is never anger, it's fear and it's sadness.
Right.
And I think it's really, really, really easy to overlook that and forget that. You learn it and you forget it, you learn it. And sometimes people's anger can just be so overwhelming, especially if it's directed at you, that you're not able to process it as anything else,
Right.
And,
yeah, it's like they've closed off, but they have their reasons for closing off.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and holding people at bay. So this is I probably can guess because I've read a lot of your work, but I really wanted to ask, when you write a story, what comes first usually? Like, is it always character, or sometimes do you come to the plot first or the scene? And specifically in this story, you mentioned probably Mitchell, but
there's always a scenario. I can't really call it a plot, but there's always a situation, a tension. I think the character, when the character arrives, it's never just a free floating character or two characters. There's always there's always a tension that interests me.
Like in Writers and Lovers.
Yeah. I mean, the first vision I had of that was Casey in the driveway, just that very first scene. Casey in the driveway with the landlord, having just written, and he wants to stop her and talk to her. And the tension is, she just needs to get back to work. Right. So there was just that one tension. But the minute I saw that, I also saw her work at the restaurant. I saw that her mother was dead, which I was really happy about because my mother had just died and I really needed to write about it, but I didn't know how. And I hadn't been writing fiction for like 6 or 9 months or something. And then suddenly I saw Casey, and then I was like, oh, her mom has just died, and I can use that. And I can use her as a vessel for my emotions. And that was a great relief. And I knew, she had writing aspirations. And I also knew that there would be a number of men in her life. There were more men in the first draft. But my agent and editor wanted me to cut them out, so I did.
I saw an interview you did with Ann Patchett, and you said that, and I was like, "Oh, that would be cool." Yeah. Even more men.
Like men.
Right. It would have been fun, but it was good. Okay, so this story finishes on a happy note, which is so great and so rare. And I was just curious how that came about in this story in particular, and then I'll ask the follow-up question.
Yeah, I pretty much always knew there would be that I couldn't leave him in his agony. I mean, when you introduce somebody who's having such a tough time, you have to give them and the reader, something at the end. I didn't know what for a while. And then, and then there was the dinner, and then, I needed him to have that. I needed them to have some sort of connection and kind of, an indication, giving each other an indication that there was, if not yet love, like care there and concern and tenderness.
Right. And the part with the quilt, I forgot to mention that before. I thought that was so beautiful because it was a quilt his mother made. And then Paula gets her period and it's on the quilt. And there's a moment where he's holding the quilt. He didn't even realize he picked it up. And I thought that was such a great rendering of like it was almost like PTSD. It felt like he picks it up and then he realizes, well, this is the beginning of the end. She's going to leave too, because she's going to become a woman and then she's going to start to hate me. And did that's just sort of came to you.
Yeah.
That's
so funny. I just think like, all right, you take this man and like, what is kind of the most kind of extreme, awkward situation for him, would be his daughter getting her period, yes. And he is left to deal with it. I don't know. I don't really know. I don't know why that came to me.
It was such a great addition that it was made by his mother, and that prompted the thought of, oh my God, she's going to start to hate me. She's going to leave. And it just was so seamless and beautiful that those losses were tied together through the quilt, and that he has this moment of being overwhelmed.
Yeah. But of course we know that she's not going anywhere.
I know. She's,
I mean, she loves her so much. And it's so funny. One reader said to me something about in this collection that there are a couple of really, really good fathers. Mm-hmm. And it was so interesting to me because I feel like I've made a career on kind of not very absent or alcoholic or drug addicted fathers. Mm-hmm. And it made me so happy. I'm like, hey, I did write a good father. And I do think he's a good father. And I do think that there is real love and care between them, that is just not ever going to be broken,
Right. What about her as a character, Paula? Were your kids around? They probably weren't even that old.
No,
yet.
they were young.
Yeah.
You know, they were just, I don't know, like 2 and 4 or something when I was working on this story. And also, you know, when they got their periods, both at sleepovers. I never even got that moment, you know. Like, oh.
I know. I only have one daughter and 3 sons, and I missed it too. Darn it.
Why does it happen at sleepovers?
I don't know. It's so unfair.
Someone else's mother gets to deal with it and is not very happy about it because the sheets are all ruined. But anyway.
I know. But it's like this life-changing moment, and you think you'll be right in the room, but it doesn't work out that way.
No, it was always like in the car at the pickup.
Right. Exactly. But Paula seems great because she wants the best for him. Like, she doesn't want him all to herself. She knows that he needs to find someone. And
yeah. And, you know, I mean, I do think maybe I drew a little bit on my own experience of having a single mother at Paula's age and very much wanting her to find the right guy. You know, like I felt like she brought home a number of wrong guys, but then when she brought home the right guy, like that was an incredible feeling, you know, and you really, like, I would have done anything to make that work. And it did work. But, and so I think somewhere in the back of my head, you know, because I think that's portrayed so often, it's portrayed that the child does not want their single parent to, you know, replace them or, you know, find somebody who's going to take away their attention. And I don't think that's always true at all. You know, you want that, for the parent, but you also want it for yourself. You want a family that looks more like a, you know, family. At least when I was a kid, that's how I felt.
Okay. Well, I have one overarching question about writing in general, and then I'll let you go because we're almost to the end of it.
Okay.
But so I know that, you know, like when you write stories or novels or whatever, you use your own life experiences, and you can, and one thing that makes writing great is that you can work through emotions that you have in the real world. But have you had the experience of people in your life being like, wait, I was in that scene, but that didn't, you know, like, where you come close to what happened, but then you veer off into fiction, and the people in your life, you know, are trying to put it together as if it's real. You know what I mean? Or have you?
No, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, sometimes I have to say in advance, okay, I've written this book, and like, you know,
starts out where we were.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And then it just veers off. And I mean, I had to do that, you know, even with Euphoria, which is not from my life, but from the life of Margaret Mead. And I sent her daughter a copy of the book and a long letter kind of explaining, listen, you know, here's where I started, and this is what I thought I was going to write. But then like 4 pages in, like I had to go in a different direction. So it's very, very fictional and that sort of thing. And I think that's hard for people. I think it's hard for people when they think they're reading about themselves and then things go all weird. But I think for some readers, I think Euphoria was hard because they really wanted it to be the Margaret Mead story, the story of her real life. And that just wasn't my interest.
Right. Right. Okay. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about the story that you wanted to discuss? Did I miss any?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
You covered it thoroughly.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This was a thrill, and I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. I love talking about it. It was really fun.